Hi, and welcome to the FX Podcast. I'm John Montgomery. Our subject today is the work done for the feature film Mickey 17. Our guests are Chris McLaughlin, VFX supervisor at DNEG, and Robyn Luckham, who served as animation director at DNEG. Now, Mike and the guys focus on the cool work done to create the Creeper characters, including discussions on how it was to work with director Bong, the complexities of the animation, and the amount of work needed to create the vast crowd scenes. So let's go ahead and cross that conversation now with Mike and the guys.
So Robyn and Chris, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Hey, Chris, when did you first get involved in this project?
It was a long time ago because the studio kind of sat on the release for a while. So it was about 2.5 years ago. I had previously done Venom 2, had taken a bit of a break, and I had heard that Bong Joon-ho was going to be making a new sci-fi film. And I asked my head of production, and he said, well, it just so happens I've been talking to Dan Glass. And I had worked previously with Dan Glass, so I kind of lobbied very hard to get involved. And
yeah, Dan's great
with him, and it kind of snowballed from there pretty much.
Yeah. So, Robyn, was it similarly like you sort of fitted in sort of fairly much after that, or did you come in later?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I knew Chris anyway, and I knew Dan from a long time ago. But yeah, because there's a heavy creature and animation portion, I was drafted in at pretty much the same time, I think, as Chris. And yeah, I got on well with Dan, had a few chats and interviews, and he teased about, the director, which obviously on the back of Parasite and what he's done, and creature work, I was very, very interested. And teased about, what this could be. And it was bigger than I thought it would be, honestly. And yeah, it was really exciting. So yeah, we met up and we kind of flew over to UK and had a lovely meet and greet with him. And myself and Chris did a little pitch, and it was really good. And he was just very, very fun and
that's the director now, or Dan you're talking about?
Oh, I'm talking about the director, but with Dan. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But Dan was incredibly supportive for that. It was really good stuff.
As I say, Dan, super great guy. But somebody I heard recently talking, actually, was a really accomplished actor, and they were discussing careers. And the thing that they said was the best advice they ever got was pick which directors you worked with, right? It's like you can't really determine projects at the early stage, but work with great directors and you'll always have a great career. And clearly, as you said, coming off the back of Parasite, this was like a great opportunity. But I'm also struck by the fact that there's a language barrier there that you don't normally have. Could you maybe, Chris, talk to that? Like, how much was that a problem, and how much was it something that you just worked around?
I'd say it wasn't a problem. Director Bong can speak English. He can understand pretty much everything we say. A lot of the time he was there with his translator, Sharon Choi, as well. And he'll kind of begin a sentence in English, halfway through we'll switch to Korean, and she'll just kind of, as soon as he stops speaking, just pick it up and just kind of translate. It was never an issue, honestly. Maybe there were some cultural references and ideas.
That's what I was going to ask about, because that's the other aspect, isn't it? It's like having a mutual sort of film reference zeitgeist kind of understanding of when you go for that shorthand, and such a rich culture of film in Korea, but of course, maybe not so well known to the rest of us. But you managed to walk around that one as well, it sounds.
Yeah, I did. I was actually already like a massive fan, and I've been in a Korean film for a long time. One of his films was the second Korean film I ever saw. But yeah, he has a pretty encyclopedic knowledge of film as well. And like Robyn was saying, we went and did that pitch, showed some references, and immediately was like, oh, that's Koyaanisqatsi. That's like kind of straight off what he was looking at.
Yeah.
So it was never an issue, I don't think.
No, remember we had an initial meeting with Heechul, and which was going to be like interesting because he doesn't speak a lick of English, and obviously our Korean's terrible. But yeah, we had a translator right there, and without sounding cliche, we just had similar matching ideas, and so we could really speak a similar language, especially from my performance or creative point of view, because we were pulling from similar references. So it was actually really quite interesting to talk that way, and it worked out quite well.
There's two things in sci-fi that I find really fascinating for teams that you have to navigate. One, they both come to the same thing, right? Which is the originality and the problems to come up with original designs and implementations of stuff. And in sci-fi, that really falls on two things. It's an original spaceship, because like almost every kind of conceivable spaceship has already appeared, and then a new original creature. And like, if that wasn't just enough, you guys had to navigate an original creature that me as an audience initially is mortified and horrified about, and then finds to be cute and cuddly and hey, I wish I had one of those. Talk to me about, if you could, how early on that was solved. Was it like concept art right out of the gate? You knew what this was going to be, or was it like, we're going to have to sort of find that point where the audience can move through the arc of the story from one position to the other?
Yeah, I mean, concept art was like right there from the beginning. I think Bong said he worked on it for 6 months to a year with Heechul, who's his concept artist, who he previously worked on with Okja and the host. So he has a kind of creature designer, and he had designs for the baby, the junior, and the mama. And there were images of like kind of sometimes it looking like a big kind of shaggy kind of yeti, and then other moment that had the ovulation moment where it opens up and you see the inside of this kind of horrific creature. So that was definitely the intention. It's really good that you picked up on it as a viewer. you never know, you're never sure that how it's going to be received.
I think.
Was that, Robert? Was that concept art moving, or was it not moving? Because I'm going to say it's one thing to do something in a still; it's another thing to get that as it has a presence on screen as it moves.
Yeah, no, they were all stills,
right?
So it was, it's an incredible challenge, but really fun. So they didn't really change massive, but Bong kind of knew exactly. Really, you find the character, you find the acting, and then you develop it from there. So he wanted people to be disgusted, and then wanted people to find them cute. That was the arc and intention, and that was always the intention. I think, overarching symbolism to see the person behind the looks, see the creature behind the actual human repulsion of it. So yeah, developing all came from the design, and then we just find out what acting he wanted to associate with which creature, because effectively we had about 3, I guess, with the baby and the juniors and mama, and then we just had to pull that acting out through. So we did a few tests and see if that worked. But yeah, it definitely the acting choices you had in the script to get us to that point, so you fell in love with them a bit.
I mean, it's a real challenge, because if I was like at Animation School 101 and you said cute, I'd say, great, big eyes, that's it. I can get a lot of expressiveness from the eyes. I don't even have to have it say any dialogue. And you didn't have that kind of in your repertoire to solve any cuteness issues.
No, and we had the eyes on stalks, and there was like 4 eyelids and like 3 bits of mandibles on top. It had and all these bits in the middle. So it was everything we could do to turn you off of it. We did, but yeah, it was really the acting choices. So for juniors, for example, the main kind of creepers, they were more like mischievous teenagers or charming moments of your life. You'd see like little cheeky bits of charm, and it was all about charm. So if you started playing all those actions and you keep repeating it, and then as you go through with the story, then you as the audience get desensitized to that look and see the thing behind it. And then that was the key for a lot of it.
I mean, you've done motion capture, you've been a motion capture director and stuff, but I'm presuming this was all keyframe?
Yeah, everything was keyframe. I mean, I would argue it's the most keyframes you could ever set. They had so many legs, mandibles, eyes, insides. It was just horrendous amounts of keyframing. But yeah, that's what it was. That's how it had to be.
So I guess, Chris, the question is, what did you what was the expectation of what was going to be provided in the plate photography? In other words, you've got at one point Mickey falls through the ice early on, and you've got a whole lot of creatures. Like, what was the expectation that would be in the plate photography that you would be working with that would give you, because it's like one Mickey and that Mickey in that shot and then multiple creatures. What were you expecting to get, and how did that play out?
I think before the shoot we weren't quite sure. So I mean, I should say that we did all the stuff kind of outside of the spaceship on the planet of Niflheim. So we never did that kind of. We did when he falls through, but we didn't do kind of in the cave, if you know what I mean.
Right.
But we knew we'd be in a white room, and we knew that there would be some. Well, we hoped that there would be something to kind of interact against. What that ended up being was, I don't know if you've seen any behind the scenes or breakdowns or images.
Well, I have, but for those that are listening.
Well, what that ended up being was like a collection of yoga balls and space hoppers. Do you know what a space hopper is?
Absolutely. I had one as a kid, grab its ears and bounce up and down like an idiot.
Yeah, there were quite a few of them on the set there to kind of represent the creepers. But yeah, that's pretty much what we were working with.
And on the surface of the planet, where you've got those massive amounts of creatures and stuff, I presume there was also a bunch of environment work and atmosphere and a bunch of other stuff, right? So was it sort of a green screen isolated shot of the actor, or was it like pretty much in a desolate space and you had all the framing and blocking?
We shot in Cardington Studios, which is this massive hangar. It's where blimps, I believe, in like World War II, and they basically a blue screen studio, like a white screen studio, basically. So a massive big space, white walls, front, back, and side, and then the ground was lined with a type of salt, I think Epsom salts, kind of very white Epsom salts, that when you walked on them and it left footprints, and from a distance, even a bit of kick up looked reasonably convincing as snow. Close up, that didn't look so good, but from a distance, it looked fine. And then in the ceiling, we had like kind of an array of kind of panels that the DOP had control over and could kind of mix in different colors. And then we had onset snow as well that we would run on certainly the first take of every shot. We'd have that as reference. I think kind of 90% of the takes that we used were not the first take, and we would add in this. So we
I imagine it would be a lot easier to add the creatures and then the snow on top.
Exactly. So like we ended up in layers of snow, layers of volumes, eddies. We did kick anything that moved along the snow would provide some kind of interaction on the ground, bit of kick up, any vehicles, all of that stuff was all CG. So yeah, we did end up taking away a lot that was in the plate, but I think if we hadn't shot in that room, in that white room, then the actors wouldn't have looked as convincingly in a snowstorm in that environment if we hadn't done that. I think it really paid off.
And most of those shots were pretty overcast, weren't they?
Yeah.
And just while we're on the technical stuff, sorry.
There was usually a little bit of direction. So we would usually, if you looked at the panels on the ceiling, like kind of maybe on the right, they would be a little bit stronger just to kind of add a bit of variation in there.
So just at a technical level, you were presumably on a 4K master and was shooting film or digital?
Digital, yeah. It was the Alexa, yeah.
And Robyn, what was your pipeline just at a technical level before we get to the creative? Like, what was the team and how big was the team?
Yeah, no, from DNEG, we were using Maya, obviously, and we had a big team from performance. So obviously performance for us and me starts with models, creatures. Most of the anim team are in North America. We must have had about 65 at the end, considering globally. And that was mainly what we'll get onto is obviously the crowd stuff as well as the actual creatures, because it was so heavy. There was no way getting around keying. You can't mocap. You have to just keyframe them and they have to look real. So it was an intensive process, and especially with the amount of them and the amount they're interacting and the style that Bong wants to go through, make it look and feel there's little moments everywhere. So yeah, it's a big team.
What were you rendering in?
At one point, it was in Clarice.
Okay. So that would have been one of the last Clarice projects, right?
It certainly was mine. Yeah, that was my last Clarice show.
And so picking back on your point a second ago, Robyn, like you've got all these creatures. One approach might be to do something procedural, aka kind of like crowd work stuff, but you didn't go down just a straight kind of procedural Houdini kind of path for those big wide shots, did you?
It's a mix.
Right.
So you had to feed it still. You had to feed it with variation, and it's so easy to pick up repeated patterns. So you have to have that. I've done a lot of crowd work, and I know that just from mocap and other things. So you have to have a mix, and you have to kind of almost layer it, and sometimes pick moments close so you can add, hero stuff, and then you'll buy a bit of hero there in a run to think it's depth, and you can see everything. And I think it's really effective. We have an excellent crowd seat who worked through and some great tests before trying to look at the procedural stuff. So there is procedural stuff in there, most definitely. We couldn't have done it without that at all. But in order to get that, I really wanted to feel I really want the whole crowd to feel hanky. It's very much like an ode to some ghibli stuff, which I love. And so we did a lot of variation in there. We had to.
The issue with the crowd stuff is that, like, a lot of that, there's a lot that's already inbuilt in Houdini, and that's great and awesome, but it's generally built for bipeds, for two-legged people, not for little eight-legged creatures. So all of that tooling had to be kind of custom built for the show.
And can you talk to me about the interaction where you've got an actor actually interacting with a creature? Because, like getting that to have the right contact, I mean, not just the right contact lighting, but I mean, just physical contact can be difficult sometimes.
For our shots, so the biggest interactive element was with the baby, and they had a really great stuffy on set. Like, it had a really good, it was very kind of malleable, but had a good weight to it when they carry it.
Yeah, she brought it to the premieres, didn't she?
Yeah, it's that was what we used for the baby, kind of interacting with the mama. They had like a head on a stick, like a big massive cutout of the mama, and they had an actor there as well to like kind of talking through her lines.
Yeah, we had stitches and glue, I think, with the puppeteers, who mama was changing in size and eyeliner, and a lot of the stuff we're doing tests of how tall she would be, and if she had to rear up, and we'd work that out with them, and if they couldn't go high enough. I worked quite close to them. They're a really great team. But yeah, certain dialogue bits for mama, again, which was amazing because we have to come up with an alien language from scratch and work out the audio and how it comes together. And then you have to work out what the English version of that would feel like through a translator. So we had on set an actress speak those lines over a huge booming microphone. So then the actors could react to that at the same time.
So to that point you were saying before about eye lines and stuff, were they sort of solved when they were in the plate photography, or were you having to do some clever work to sort of realign where people were looking and where those heights would have actually been?
I tried to
feel
solve
like we kind of I feel like we got it all on set.
What I was trying to do actually, Mike, was I was actually trying to do poses live. So I was on set with Chris, and then we'd look at some shots or boards coming up, and I'll be like, okay, let's I'll pose a creature in my scene and just see where the eye lines works out the height and go back. So I actually do live kind of posing that could help just get that right. Because I remember the original eye line for Mama standing up was way too low. And I did it and measured it, and it was like, yeah, it needs to be 15 feet off, something like that. But I think we did a lot before. I mean, which I'm always a believer in because you don't want to do it after.
As I said, I think it's so successful how affectionately you feel for the creatures by the end of the film, and at the beginning, it's like almost you can't watch, right? Like it's like I got to see an early premiere, so I didn't know what was happening, so I didn't know that where the plot was going to go, so I was almost like, I do not want to watch this. This is going to be horrendous, and also the point of the story, you know he's going to die. So in most films, you feel, well, he's not going to die, you'll get out of it. In this film, I was like always worried that he was going to die and it was going to be gruesome. So there was no sort of safety net emotionally when watching it. So the creatures really did horrify me. But I have to reference the fact, Robyn, you were on Joon, right? So that's some big ass sand creatures. This is some pretty hefty snow creatures. Any kind of comparative kind of notes that the vast differences between the two, or does the properties of sand actually kind of from an animator's point of view give you something similar to the properties of snow?
Well, it's actually a good point. Yeah, doing the sandworm development, and really it's similar with Mama and the snow. I think it's a bit of a blessing because they're wrapped in a physical element which you can't cheat. So sand and snow, if you do an animation that's too slow or too fast or too big, which sometimes they want, it will break. It'll destroy the sand and it will destroy the snow. So look, we had some absolute stellar stars on our show, so we were pretty good. But yeah, there's definitely elements you pull that gruesomeness, but you've got to get the size and weight correct, because that really shows that trepidation. So similar bits, but wrapping in snow, if you do it too wrong, it will just break that simulation pretty quickly.
So am I hearing that the physicality of those elements that I would know as a viewer, like I obviously know snow, we obviously know sand, is helping to sell what you're trying to pull off with the animation, or are you finding it's stopping you from going as far as you want to?
Well, it's helping, because the fact is, you don't want to go. If you go too far and the effect says no, then it's not right in for reality. I'm trying to do a real creature that everyone believes is physically real. So the effects is helping me to say, okay, this is going too fast. I've done it same with water. It's actually a help for me on this kind of style of VFX, definitely.
But the sim would come after the character animation, right? Like I imagine that no matter how you set up the environment, you're still going to have creature that then would feed the sim, because if snow or anything's coming off them or whatever, you need the physicality of the model having been animated to then run the sims. Am I being naive?
Yeah, that is how you run the shot, but there can be kind of certainly in the development, there's a bit of back and forth to try and see kind of what's going to work and what's going to look convincing.
Yeah, and we can get very simple physical sims in our anim scenes that can help, just like a ball pit or something like that, which can help. Very huge kind of simulated objects, but it does help. I get used to it, and hopefully I can see it a little better than waiting to run to the sim.
I mean, obviously, Robyn, you're like got an incredible eye and experience, but Chris, what stage did you like to have stuff at before you took it to the director? Like, in other words, in that process, were you wanting to show stuff really early where it was still kind of clunky, or were you wanting to get something that had some decent stuff in there to be able to see how it was going to look and not scare anyone?
Well, the process that we went through actually was like, before they even shot anything, we did this whole kind of period of kind of animation testing where we took those concepts and we built like a really, really quickly. We were able to get the sculpts from the concept artists and build like a kind of prototype creeper. And we started working like really early on with the director to get feedback on what their character was, how they moved, and also how they looked. He knew what he wanted, and
Yeah,
was more like whether we had an idea of what he wanted. He was great with feedback, and as was Dan as well. Dan, I trusted in Dan. It wasn't a. I don't remember ever being nervy about showing anything.
no, and it's more about trying to just get the acting choices right. And I think it wasn't
Yeah.
the fact that he knows what he wants, but he still wants to see, does it actually apply? Does it work in the creatures from what we did? And some of the choices in animation changed. You see the concepts and you think, oh, that's a caterpillar, a millipede with all those legs. So you would start that way naturally, but we developed, oh no, it has to run, it has to gallop. I'm like, well, that doesn't happen in millipedes. How does that look? What does that look like? So we have to go down and explore those avenues, and then we can see what its intentions are. And we did that. That was pretty good, actually.
The things that I was hesitant to show was when you build something from a concept, and these were like really well rendered, really detailed. But what we built was still, to me, looked like a concept. Like we had a creature designer at DNEG Lucas who could really go into really kind of infinite detail and what would kind of make them feel really realistic. And there was a kind of point where, for me, it was like we worked it into so much detail and done so much work. I'm really proud of this. This really looks like something that's really kind of living and breathing. Have we gone away from the kind of cute? Is it not looking cute enough and friendly enough now? So those are the things that I worry about. Being told to kind of pull back on the detail.
Robyn, I've spoken to character designers and stuff before, and they've always stressed how important it is to have a backstory, not because they're being, like arty about it, but in fact, it informs their animation decisions. If they know if it's a herbivore, if it's a carnivore, they know like if it's like comes from this type of environmental back, and how it sort of has this sort of ecosystem, then informs an animation decision that provides a consistent character. So could you talk to like what the animators understood of these creatures? Because we, as the audience, don't need to know that, but then we appreciate it if it's a consistent sort of narrative expressed visually.
Yeah, 100%. And that's definitely all about the prep. You need to get that kind of ethos and basis. Otherwise, you can go quite off field quite quickly, and the audience knows it, whether they can pin it or not. So yeah, there's a congruence we had to make. So really, we got from Bong a Bible. I think I don't remember it is, Chris. I have to find it, but it's like, of what Niflheim was, and what these creatures did, and I think they eat rocks. And I all this dev period we had, I looked at like, well, how do they breathe? I mean, and how do they talk, and where are their lungs? And I was working out all these pits and picking up from creatures. So we had all this kind of every avenue, and like, well, why would they breathe like this? Because of this. Okay, well, that would affect how they would walk and how they protect themselves. Well, that would affect if we do a run this way. So everything was based on that, and that is like the key for a good creature. That is literally the key for me. So yeah, the backstories were laid out by Bong, and we kind of took them to areas which not necessarily in the film at all, like breathing or speaking, or where are the holes in the head and what do they do, which we did work out. And yeah, it's hugely important. We did a lot of that with him, and managed to do tests back and forth to make sure it was right.
So you touched on it then, and I touched on it earlier, this whole idea of weight and movement. And obviously where I'm going with this is the herd running at sort of a charging sequence, because a lot of moving characters moving very, very quickly, like that's where it could easily fall over for a creature that doesn't look like a cheetah. It looks more like, like a walrus, right? I mean, in one sense. So talk to me about like how easy it was in that ecosystem, in that backstory, to understand how these creatures could move at speed, and then translating that to visuals that you thought sort of, which I did. I mean, it worked, but like how you made that work.
It was really hard. I remember talking to Chris and seeing the boards and going like, wow, okay, this is going to be a real challenge. But yeah, you build it up in layers. I mean, the system with crowd we had from a performance point of view, with the acting choices, there was definitely different levels that we knew they were going to go get angrier and angrier. And in that, we needed more kind of clips for them poking around or running. But we worked out the runs earlier from based on the character, actually quite influenced a lot by the cat bus run from Studio Ghibli. And we worked out, okay, that will work really well. Then what stages do we need to get them? How can we pattern that down? And working with crowd to kind of see, okay, what are we missing? What more variants do we need? And each variant would have the character we needed. So when it was looking up and looking around, it would do it in a manner of a cheeky teenage boy. If they're working together, they'd be nudging each other out the way, or like pushing their heads, and they wouldn't nicely go towards those, clamber over each other and push it out of the way. I want to do that first, So every bit started from the back, and then we moved it up. But really, I think credit to the crowd team, because we were producing masses and masses of clips, but they had
I was going to say, like, for everything that Robyn has just mentioned there, you got a clip, which is a task for an animator, and you need like many variants of each of them so they don't look repeated. And then the way I remember it as well is, I think we had assumed that the kind of circling motion that they're doing around the ship was always going to be a bit of a gallop or a run. And then later it was, well, actually this whole sequence, it has to be built up. So they have to start off on a walk, and then on a trot, and then on a gallop, which just like kind of instantly like kind of multiplies your number of clips that we have to produce for the crowd system.
And then we talked about, is there any more females? And they were like, oh, I think Mama's the only one. I said, oh, what about the babies? Oh, crap. Oh, do they have to run and trot too? Okay, yeah. And the scales just start scaling up and up and up. But it adds to that variety, so you can't see it. The idea is you watch that crowd and you don't feel you were seeing anything repeating.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that. The second that you mentioned that, I remember in the cinema noting like there was that elbowing aside, like pushing somebody aside kind of thing. And I remember thinking at the time that was a sweet moment, but I didn't articulate it as a teenage boy. Though when you say it, it kind of is a perfect match, right? But it was that jostling stuff. Those are, dare I say it, the sort of humanity of the action that really sells it as a live thing rather than a detached thing where they aren't cognitive creatures. Absolutely. They're just moving blobs. Yeah.
And that's what is important to him. And I think, dare I say, I think Director Bong thought of his own children at some points, for those, the main kind of creepers. And that's what you wanted to do. You want to be able to see that is kind of endearing and not see the creature that's wrapped around it. So we put as many of those in as we could, really.
So, Chris, as you touched on earlier, you didn't do all of the work here. In fact, the DNEG did a huge chunk, but also you guys worked with Framestore. How was that relationship?
that was great. The Framestore supervisor was Stuart Penn, and their anim soup was Max Solomon. And we met them on set, and they were there on set, and we got on great with them. We shared the same assets. We kind of led on the juniors, they led on the babies and did all that great stuff inside the ship. And yeah, it was great working with them.
Did you manage to transfer files between, I mean, obviously the look files, but I mean, just normally there's a point at which, well, the rigs don't match or whatever, and you got to like reinvent things, or were they able to swap assets?
That was, I think, maybe Robyn can speak to that. I think that was the trickiest part, just kind of matching the rigs, and then there's presumably there's a kind of way of working with them as well to get kind of similar movements. And hair is always a little bit tricky as well.
They would have had a different renderer as well, right? So
yeah,
you got to get that same
I think
look.
that probably lent towards that awards because they were inside, we were outside, so we could kind of almost get away with that. But yeah,
helps,
I was luckily I knew Max as well. I worked with Framestore years ago, and he's excellent. And honestly, the working relationship we had was brilliant. We both were the same. Didn't really see each other as separate vendors. We just wanted to know what Bong wanted and what we could act, and we'd share ideas because we were sharing the mama creature a lot in a few shots and just making sure we're on the same wavelength of what it needs to happen. But it was a real great privilege to work with them. Really great.
So Chris, if you were doing this film again from scratch, not as a sequel, and you could go back and talk to yourself and give yourself some advice, what advice would you give in hindsight?
Start the crowd work now. Like immediately start developing the tools for those. I wouldn't change it though. Like honestly, that it was a really fun show. It's interesting that the comment you made earlier about like picking directors, don't go and pick the show. Like at the beginning of the show, we were given like an A4 drawing of a ship and circles around it, and then like a load of numbers in various locations around it. And this was from the director, and these numbers, they referred to scenes within the film and where they took place and the path that the mama took around the ship and where she met up with the Mickeys, and then one of them got taken away, and this is where that happened. And that was before they had shot anything. That was to help out the previs guys. All of that stuff right at the end of the film was exactly as written, as drawn. He just had the idea in his head of what the show was going to be, and it never really wavered at any point. So there were a couple of kind of minor creative decisions taken, but it was clear he knew the film that he wanted to make. And when you've got that, you can spend the right amount of time making things work and making them correctly.
And yet I take it that it wasn't sort of Hitchcock level prescriptive, this is exactly what I want in frame, and just animated exactly the way that we've done it. There was still serious animator contributions to those performances, right? Inside that framework.
100%.
I think a lot was drawings, but again, we were lucky we got this development. I mean, we really needed this development period. So it's almost like when he's happy with his actors, doing his actors' choices, he allows his actors to act. So he kind of said, well, you know what the juniors do, and we know what that spirit is. So sometimes we might have pushed it too far. Sometimes he said, you know what, we could have a little bit more here. And then we had spirit. Like there's one shot, which is one of my favorites, where Mama slides in to try and rescue Zoko, and there's all these cameras on the back, and they're all key-framed, and we've got one with his tongue stuck and one pushing someone else. And all these little moments, and we just built it up and up because he was super happy to see that. There's another one where they do a trumpet scene where they call them, and there's one standing on one, then he has another one standing on another head, and another one, and all these little elements were kind of grew as we went. But it was great. It was really good, but he knew what the actors were, so then we could help grow the shots in the right way.
Yeah, I think it's terrific when a director treats animators as actors, which, gives them the credit that they deserve, rather than I mean, obviously there's a technical aspect there, but it's the performance that makes you enjoy the film, right? So
yeah, and I think as long as we got that prep and got that early, then we could make those right decisions. Ultimately, once you've got your acting right before, then when you do the shots, they make sense because you're doing it in the right tone. And I think because we developed that, we had more freedom to do a lot more in those shots than we might normally have had on other shows.
Yeah. Informed decisions are great from animators, and if you've got that environment where they can make those informed decisions, then they can act, and the films are better for it. I can totally see that. Guys, it's been terrific talking to you. Thank you so much for taking time to run through it. And I think, you guys did an excellent job. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. That's really kind. Thank you.
Well, thanks, guys, for that. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Really interesting to hear some of the complexities that went into the work behind the creepers. I think they really turned out amazing, especially how our perception of them changed over the duration of the film. Well, that's it for this episode of the FX Podcast. For Mike Seymour, I'm John Montgomery. Thanks for listening.